There is a moment in life when love stops feeling like a beautiful dream and starts feeling like something real, something that can change the way you see yourself, your future, and even the world around you. For Daniel, that moment came on an ordinary rainy evening when he met Emily in a small coffee shop on the quiet side of the city. He had never believed that one person could completely change another person's life, but that night would prove him wrong. Daniel had spent years building walls around his heart. He had been hurt before, trusted the wrong person, and learned the painful lesson that sometimes the person you love most can leave you with the deepest scars. So he stopped expecting anything from love. He focused on work, paid his bills, helped his family, and convinced himself that being alone was easier than being disappointed again. Emily was different. She had also experienced heartbreak, but instead of becoming cold, she had become more understanding. She believed that people could be broken and still deserve love. She believed that a wounded heart could heal if someone was patient enough to stay. The first time Daniel saw her, she was sitting near the window with a book in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. Rain covered the glass behind her, and the soft gray evening made the entire cafe feel peaceful. Daniel only noticed her for a few seconds before looking away, but something about her expression stayed in his mind. She looked calm, yet there was a sadness in her eyes that he somehow recognized. A few minutes later, the chair beside Emily became available, and Daniel sat there because every other seat was occupied. Neither of them said anything at first. They simply continued with their own lives, two strangers sharing the same quiet space. Then Emily accidentally dropped her pen, and it rolled toward Daniel's shoes. He picked it up and handed it back to her. She smiled and thanked him. It was a tiny moment, almost meaningless. But sometimes life-changing stories begin with moments that seem too small to matter. Their conversation started with the weather and slowly moved toward books, work, dreams, and the strange ways life could surprise people. Daniel discovered that Emily loved old songs, quiet mornings, and places where she could watch people without being noticed. Emily discovered that Daniel pretended to be serious, but secretly enjoyed making people laugh. When the cafe closed, they walked outside together. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets shining beneath the city lights. Daniel offered to walk Emily to her car, and she accepted. Before they separated, Emily looked at him and said that she hoped they would meet again. Daniel smiled and told her that he hoped so too. That night, something inside him felt different. It was not love yet, but it was the beginning of hope. In the following weeks, they started seeing each other more often. Sometimes they met for coffee, sometimes they walked through the park, and sometimes they simply sat together without needing to fill the silence. Daniel began noticing little things about Emily. He noticed how she smiled when she was nervous, how she became excited when talking about something she cared about, and how she always remembered small details about other people. Emily noticed that Daniel always helped others without expecting praise. He would hold doors open, help an elderly neighbor carry groceries, or quietly pay for someone's meal when he knew they were struggling. One evening, Emily asked him why he was always so kind when life had not always been kind to him. Daniel thought for a moment before answering. He said that pain had taught him exactly what kind of person he never wanted to become. Emily looked at him with a softness he had never seen before. She told him that maybe the hardest experiences were sometimes preparing people to appreciate the right ones. Those words stayed with Daniel. For the first time in years, he started imagining a future that included someone else, but fear remained. He was afraid that if he allowed himself to love Emily completely, he would eventually lose her. He kept waiting for something to go wrong. He became distant whenever the relationship felt too serious, and Emily noticed. One night, she finally asked him what he was afraid of. Daniel admitted that he was afraid of loving someone deeply, because deep love gave another person the power to hurt you. Emily took his hand and told him that love was never a promise that pain would disappear. Real love was choosing to stay honest and vulnerable, even when fear told you to run. Daniel looked at her and realized that she was not asking him to forget his past. She was asking him not to let his past control his future. From that night onward, Daniel began changing. He stopped comparing Emily to people who had hurt him. He stopped expecting her to leave. He started trusting her actions instead of his fears. Their relationship became stronger because they learned that love was not only about romantic moments. It was about patience, forgiveness, respect, and showing up when life became difficult. When Emily had a terrible day at work, Daniel listened without trying to fix everything. When Daniel felt overwhelmed by family responsibilities, Emily stayed beside him and reminded him that he did not have to carry everything alone. Slowly, they became more than a couple. They became a safe place for each other. One Saturday morning, they drove outside the city without planning where they would go. They found a small hill overlooking the countryside and sat there for hours. Emily rested her head on Daniel's shoulder while they watched clouds move across the sky. She asked him when he realized he loved her. Daniel smiled and said he could not remember one exact moment. Maybe it happened when she remembered how he took his coffee. Maybe it happened when she stayed beside him during his hardest week. Maybe it happened when he realized that he no longer feared tomorrow because he wanted to see her in it. Emily smiled and said that was exactly how she felt. Love had not arrived with fireworks. It had arrived quietly, through ordinary moments that slowly became precious, and Daniel finally understood something he had never understood before. When love becomes real, everything changes. You stop looking for perfection and start appreciating presence. You stop asking whether someone will make your life easy and start asking whether you can build a life together through both easy and difficult days. But just as Daniel and Emily began believing they had finally found something lasting, life was about to test whether their love was truly strong enough to survive the unexpected. The test came sooner than either of them expected. One Monday morning, Emily received a phone call that changed everything. Her company was closing its local office, and she had been offered a position in another city, hundreds of miles away. It was the kind of opportunity she had once dreamed about, but now, the thought of leaving Daniel made the decision painful. When she told him, she expected fear, anger, or disappointment. Instead, Daniel remained quiet for a moment and asked her what she wanted. Emily admitted that she wanted the opportunity, but she was terrified that distance would destroy what they had built. Daniel took her hand and reminded her that real love was not about holding someone back because you were afraid of losing them. It was about wanting the best for them. Even when the best path was difficult, Emily asked if he really believed they could survive the distance. Daniel told her that he did not know what the future would bring, but he knew he would rather fight for their relationship than lose it because of fear. Emily accepted the job. The next few months were difficult. Their schedules rarely matched. Some days they could only speak for a few minutes. There were nights when Emily felt lonely in her new apartment, and mornings when Daniel wished he could simply drive to her door. Misunderstandings happened. Small disagreements became bigger because they could not sit beside each other and explain how they felt. There were moments when both wondered whether love alone was enough. But every time they reached that point, they remembered why they had chosen each other. They learned to communicate instead of assuming. They learned to apologize without keeping score. They learned that missing someone was not a sign that the relationship was failing. Sometimes it was proof that the person had become important. After 6 months, Daniel received an unexpected promotion that required him to move to another city for work. It was closer to Emily, but still not the same city. He had a choice to make. He could continue living comfortably where he was, or take a risk that might bring him closer to the woman he loved. Daniel thought about it for days. Finally, he accepted the position. When he told Emily, she cried. Not because everything had suddenly become easy, but because she realized that Daniel was no longer running away from love. He was choosing it. A few weeks later, Daniel arrived in Emily's city. He did not have a perfect plan. He did not have every detail of their future figured out. He simply knew that he wanted to build that future with her. They found a small apartment, started sharing ordinary routines, and discovered that real love was often hidden inside simple things. It was making breakfast together on Sunday mornings. It was leaving a note before going to work. It was remembering to buy the snack the other person liked. It was sitting together after a difficult day without needing to say anything. It was laughing over mistakes and forgiving each other when emotions became too strong. One evening, Emily came home exhausted and found Daniel preparing dinner. The kitchen was messy. The food was slightly burned, and Daniel looked completely defeated. Emily started laughing. Daniel laughed too. They sat on the kitchen floor and ate the imperfect meal together. Emily looked at him and said that this was the kind of love she had always wanted. Not a perfect love, but a real one. A love that could survive bad days, mistakes, distance, uncertainty, and fear. Daniel realized that she was right. Love was not the absence of problems. Love was having someone who made the problems worth facing. Years passed, and their relationship grew deeper. They experienced celebrations and disappointments, successes and failures. There were days when they disagreed strongly, but they learned not to turn disagreements into battles. They learned that being right was sometimes less important than protecting the relationship. They also learned that people change, and real love means continuing to know the person in front of you rather than holding them hostage to who they were years ago. One evening, Daniel took Emily back to the same cafe where they had first met. The place looked almost exactly the same window, the same wooden tables, the same soft music playing quietly in the background. Daniel ordered 2 coffees and sat across from her. Emily smiled and asked why he had brought her there. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Emily immediately became emotional. He told her that years ago, he had been afraid of love because he believed love gave people the power to hurt you. But meeting her taught him that love also gave people the power to heal, grow, and become better versions of themselves. He told her that she had not rescued him from his past. She had simply shown him that he did not have to live inside it forever. Then he asked her to spend the rest of her life with him. Emily said yes through tears and laughter. As they held each other, Daniel remembered the lonely man who had once walked into that cafe, believing that being alone was safer. He barely recognized that person anymore. He had learned that love does not always arrive when you are ready. Sometimes it finds you while you are still healing. Sometimes it enters quietly and changes you before you even realize what is happening. And when love becomes real, everything changes. Your priorities change. Your fears become smaller. Your definition of happiness becomes simpler. You begin to understand that happiness is not always found in perfect moments. Sometimes it is found in someone sitting beside you after the worst day of your life. Sometimes it is a hand reaching for yours when you feel uncertain. Sometimes it is a voice saying, "We will figure this out together." Real love does not promise that there will never be storms. It promises that you do not have to face every storm alone. Daniel and Emily eventually married, but their wedding was not the greatest moment of their love story. The greatest moments came afterward, in thousands of ordinary days, when they continued choosing each other. Years later, when someone asked Daniel what made his marriage last, he smiled and said that love was not one decision made once. It was a decision made again and again every day. Emily heard him and smiled, because she knew exactly what he meant. They had learned that the strongest love was not always the loudest. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it looked like patience. Sometimes it looked like forgiveness. Sometimes it looked like staying when leaving would have been easier. And perhaps that is the greatest truth about love. When it becomes real, everything changes, not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because you no longer face an imperfect life alone. You have someone who knows your fears, sees your flaws, understands your past, believes in your future, and still chooses you. That is when love stops being just a feeling and becomes a home.